Welcome to the Holo Health Podcast, where we help you become healthy in every area of your life. On each episode, not only will we provide ways to improve your physical health, but also ways to improve your mental and spiritual health as well. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Listeners, welcome back to the Holo Health Podcast. We have a super special guest today. We have on the episode Dr. Julie Fratantoni. She is a cognitive neuroscientist. And if that doesn't blow you away, she's also doing ongoing research for the Center for Brain Health. Julie, thanks for being on the episode where Alex and I are both here. We're super excited for the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Alex, I want to say hey to you.
I appreciate that. I'm here as well, but I'm excited to chat.
Yeah. Julie, so a lot of our listeners may not know who you are, and they just heard a little snippet and they're like, whoa, how did these guys connect with Julie? So paint a picture for us on how you're connected to the podcast, Holo Health, and then give us a snapshot a little bit on who you are.
Sure. Well, one of my favorite things about social media that I never anticipated when I created my professional account or just started sharing science was just how fun it was going to be to get to connect with like-minded people just from all over the world. And so that was how we originally connected. And so have really enjoyed following along with your health content and the holistic perspective that you have. A little bit about me. My background, I have a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. Before that, I had a clinical background as well in speech pathology. So I really care about not just making scientific discoveries, but really translating them or communicating them in a way that is helpful to people. So right now I'm focused on a really large research study. It's a 10-year longitudinal study looking at how to define, measure, and improve brain health. So really looking at potential, optimizing performance, how do you keep a healthy brain healthy? And so we've built our own online platform and soon to be mobile app that's coming this fall that basically gives people the tools to build brain healthy habits.
Is that the first time that's been shared on like a podcast? Or
I've definitely been dropping hints about it here and there. So yeah, and the October will be, I guess, more of a soft launch. But yeah, definitely keep your eye out for more info on that.
That's super cool. Julie, a follow-up question I have is, how did all of this start? Like, how did this passion and this pursuit start for you for obviously speech pathology, but then digging into brain health even further?
Yeah, I think a lot of people maybe don't realize, well, first, they may not be familiar with speech pathology as a field in general, which can work with everything from infants all the way up to geriatrics, so really every age of the lifespan. But I particularly was interested in more of the medical setting. So individuals who had a traumatic brain injury or a stroke, and you're kind of rehabbing that. And all speech and language is very neuro, that's all in the brain. And a lot of times communication is one of the first things that's impaired when there is an issue with the brain. So it's kind of like a window into that. It's also, language is primarily the way that we're able to assess cognition. So it's really hard to know what someone's thinking without using either written or spoken language. So I kind of, got really interested in that rehab aspect. And I'm just a very curious person by nature. I really love learning. And so decided to pursue a PhD and really try to better understand the mechanisms of the brain in healthy, so that we could perhaps develop better therapies for when things go wrong. But as I jumped into my PhD, I actually that was when I started at the Center for Brain Health as a student, and I fell in love with this idea of high performance. That was not something that, I was used to working with clinical populations, people that had disorders or illness. And so it was really exciting to think, wow, and so this was 10 years ago, just to give you a frame of reference, 10 years ago. I think with the rise of social media and the reach of podcasts and these things, that this information is now pretty much common knowledge that, neuroplasticity, you can change your brain. There's all these ways to do it. People like Andrew Huberman, right? Like making this just a common everyday terms. But 10 years ago, it wasn't. And so it was really energizing to me to think, wow, there's a different way to use your brain. The fact that our brain is arguably the most important organ in the body, and yet we're not really taught how to use it, how to take care of it, how to optimize it. I think a lot of the health kind of information was very focused on the physical health, the heart health, exercise, diet, which those things are really important, and it's all intertwined. The brain isn't separate from the body. But I was fascinated by that. And so that was where I first kind of learned what we do, which is cognitive training, basically strategy-based. So when I say strategy-based, it means how you approach information, how you make decisions, being strategic, being innovative, flexible thinking, like all these things are skills that can be trained essentially. So giving like a framework of strategies for really how you approach life in a sense, and in a way that will decrease stress, increase productivity. So I just was like, man, I wish I'd known this sooner. And I know so many people that could benefit from this just in daily life. So anyway, that was kind of like my launching into brain health, and really this perspective that, the brain is not fixed. I think a lot of people, even when I meet them, they're like, kind of like, what just happened? It's like, they're intimidated, or there's so much stigma around the brain, or it's like, oh, I'm not as smart as you, or like, I didn't get as good of grades or IQ, or, these kind of just antiquated ways of measuring that. And so what I'm really excited about is the potential to have more dynamic measurements that really don't just put you in a box, but rather say, here's what you're at today, and here's what you can do to be better tomorrow, next month, next year, with kind of small incremental changes. So, that was a really long-winded way of saying how I got into it. But I would say my career has taken a lot of twists and turns, and now actually, loving being involved in research, but also taking a bigger role in really translating that science in a fun way. So, using kind of science communication, working with a creative team, creating animated videos, doing those things to really help just break down science in a way that is approachable, which I never would have thought I would be like producing content in that way. But it's so much fun. And it definitely was not a linear path to where I sit now.
So Julie, everything you said is gold. I'm super encouraged and inspired by everything you said. I'm really glad there's really smart people like you out there making really good advancements in science for health. Here's my question though. If I'm a listener and I'm like, okay, what does that mean for me? Take all of Julie's smart brain and research and science and her history and boil it down. You're like, okay, I'm just listening to this podcast because I like Julie. I want to be healthy. I follow Holo, and I'm like, this is really cool. What do I do? What are like the main things, the irreducible minimums, like the main buckets when it comes to brain health? Let's dig into that. What would you share?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, brain health is everything. Like there's not a single thing you do that your brain is not involved in. So it's really a shift in thinking about really daily habits. And I feel like this resonates probably with a lot of what you guys talk about, is kind of just not accepting the cultural norm for a lot of things, and really understanding that it's going to look different. And, if you think about what kind of is sadly the norm, at least in America right now, is like, we have the most drugs, we're the most unhappy, the most depressed, the most, sick, compared to these other nations. And so, okay, something needs to change, right? A lot of just kind of these behaviors that are considered just really normal are actually really toxic to brain health. And so, I guess it starts with kind of a mindset shift or perspective shift, or just being open to like, hey, I people are going to think I'm weird, right? But it's like, do you care more about people thinking you're weird, or do you want your brain to work when you're in your 80s? Do you want to be able to play with your grandkids and remember their names and be involved? It's like thinking about the long term, which is something that's hard for our brains to do. We definitely prioritize that instant gratification. So it's a shift into thinking like, how can I delay gratification so that not only do I feel better now, but also in the future? Okay, so I wasn't answering your specific question, which is like, what are those areas? And so I said it's everything. We know the big buckets. So the big things that are important for health that you guys talk about all the time. I mean, it's like looking at obviously physical exercise, nutrition, sleep, stress management, social connection. Those are all like, those pillars are there. Absolutely. You're not going to have a healthy brain without a healthy body, and vice versa. But then adding in some of these other ones that are maybe, things that we kind of generally know, but we don't create a plan for, okay, the right level of cognitive challenge that I should engage in, or we're not having a plan for like, how much new learning am I doing, or how much problem solving or flexible thinking can I push myself to do? So, I guess when it comes to those things, that's really where the hard part about it is it's so individual. So the way that I use my brain is different than the way each of you use your brain, because you have different passions, you have different skills, you have different hobbies. And, depending on the stage of life, that'll even change for the same person, right, as we progress. So I think I'll give some actual tangibles now. So like a few things that are really toxic that we don't realize. One is multitasking. Is extremely toxic. So I'll give a few habits that maybe you can drop, and then a few habits that maybe you could think about adding in. So, we're in a very distracting world. We've built distracted brains. I say this a lot because the brain you have is a brain that you have trained based on how you use it every day. And you can, basically we're reinforcing that pattern every single day. So you can change it, but it's going to take work because you think about how many times you've reinforced that same thing. So with the multitasking or constant distractions, it's really like identifying and prioritizing when are tasks that I need deep focus, and then how can I set myself up for success. And it's going to take a bit of retraining to turn off notifications, put your phone in another room, kind of environmentally set yourself up for success. But then there is kind of that muscle that you have to flex, that focus muscle that you have to build, because we're used to being interrupted every 5 seconds. Or even if your phone didn't go off, you might just check it anyway because you thought of something and, oh, did that person respond to this? Or, I wonder about that. So definitely that's one big one I would say is like one thing you could ditch would be doing 2 things at once. And something to kind of prioritize would be really deep focused work, making sure that that is a single tasking event.
That's a great takeaway. And going back to, Julia, what you mentioned a few minutes ago, when you're talking about how the brain impacts the body and vice versa, and you obviously follow along with what we're sharing at Holo Health and how we look at health as so much bigger and broader than just the physical. It's not just diet and exercise. It's physical, mental, emotional, relational, spiritual. And I love that you touched on like these key kind of bare minimums on those things that align with exactly what we share as well about this is really great for the brain. And then there's kind of a next step there. My follow-up question for you is, when you're engaging with people at work and they're coming to you with some desire to improve their brain health, what are they saying that they're struggling with that leads, what's the problem that they have that's leading them to the door, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So we have a few different programs. I mean, like, okay, one program, for example, is called Charisma, and that one's specifically around social cognition. So that's a program where from the scale of social anxiety to actual autism spectrum, you can practice sort of the social interactions and have sort of a strategy and framework to do that. So that's like one very niche example, I guess. But I would say the majority of people, when it comes to more of the high performance, a lot of times, I mean, we've worked with a ton of, high performers, corporate executives, military, special forces, and everyone wants like an edge. Everyone wants, to be able to do everything. Everyone wants to constantly, or at least kind of that group is wanting to, and everyone deals with the same problems. Like stress is so universal. It doesn't matter like, where you are or what, no one is immune to stress. And so I feel like one of the big things is that I think everyone deals with is this information overload. Like we're bombarded with, whether it's social media, whether it's email, like how many emails do you get that you just don't even open or you don't read, or you just like, or if you're, say you're gonna even just, I don't know, even like choosing a movie to watch or choosing a place to go on vacation, or like the amount of research, it's like we just have so much at our fingertips. So it's a lot to manage that, or feeling like, like within your job specifically, like, oh my gosh, I just have so much coming at me. And so how to better approach that. And so part of that stress management has to do with kind of what I was talking about with attention, really like filtering and focusing. So giving people a framework of like, okay, I'm going to go for, quality over quantity. I'm going to kind of like be able to distill from something I'm going to read, like boil it down to like, what is its essence? What should I take from this? And not get bogged down. I think a lot of time, at least in school, I feel like because it was so much about like teaching to the test or like you just memorized a bunch of stuff and kind of dumped it. It didn't really train us how to take in information in a way, that made it really useful. So like one thing that we talk about a lot is having people when any information you interact with. So after listening to this podcast, after reading an article, after watching a movie or going to, I don't know, yeah, any sort of information, it could be verbal, written, to really think like what are my key takeaways and like how does that apply specifically to my life? Like what is a take home message or a lesson if I were to tell someone about like, hey, I just watched this movie, you should watch it, like this was one lesson I learned. The act of doing that is a really good brain exercise and it changes the way that you're going to take that information in. And if you're going to spend the time to read it or watch it, or like our time is so valuable, if you're going to be doing that, make sure that you remember it, because I mean, how many books like have you read that you're like, I don't remember what that was about, or even movies that you're sorry, like, I don't remember. And it's a lot of times because we're just passively engaging with information. So how to take a more just proactive approach to what's coming at you, and then, make it meaningful. And that creates more connections within the brain, makes it easier to access that information in the future, and then can spark new ideas because you're, kind of adding, like I said, more connections.
Julie, let's say someone's listening right now and they're like, hey, this sounds great. I love it for you guys, but I'm fine. Like, I don't feel like my brain is an issue. I can get my work done and I go home and watch Netflix. I'm fine. They scroll social media. They just don't see the problem. They don't see that, like, hey, I could possibly get better. What would you say to that person as far as like, hey, there's so much more out there? What would you respond?
Yeah. So we have designed a measure called the Brain Health Index, and we intentionally put it on a random scale. Like it used to be out of 100, and people would see it. And if they got like a 90, they'd be like, oh, I'm good. I don't need to do anything, kind of like what you're describing. Or if they got like a 60, they'd be like, oh my gosh, I failed, because we're so used to like the school system of grading. So we put it on a random scale. Like it's like if you got a score, it's like a 634 and you're like, okay. And the point is that there is no ceiling. Like no matter how good you think you are, there truly is no cap on your brain's potential, because there's just infinite possibilities, infinite ways to strengthen it. And so to understand, like, how do you even know what your peak is? And maybe it's more of like a complacency of like, yeah, I'm good and I'm happy being where I'm at. And so, I mean, I guess with that, I would just say, like kind of looking at different areas of your life of like, are you fulfilled in relationships? Are you feeling, like kind of like looking at work, like looking at, I don't know, just I guess different areas. And I feel like it would truly be rare to find someone that like on all fronts was like, yes, I am like at my peak, top of my game in every single one of these areas. And if they are, I'd love to meet you and you can tell us your secrets.
That's hilarious. Yeah,
Well,
we
let
love
me
you.
introduce you to Trevor Deal. He has peaked and perfected every area of health, which is why he's the Holo Health poster child. So we can chat offline later.
You made some
Those are his. That yeah, they're actually in the mail right now. But that's after this conversation.
anyways.
Those are his words, not mine.
Since, anyways, Julie, here's something that we talk about, and you alluded to earlier, is this pursuit of, let's take these high performers, right? They're coming to you and like it's almost like they want to maximize every single aspect of their potential. And so maybe they've gotten their sleep down, or maybe they've gotten their nutrition, and then they're like, okay, cognitively, like I need to take the next step. And so that's the connection for you guys. Yet there's people who, just like Alex described, are comfortable with where they are. But if we aren't mentally and emotionally healthy and able to kind of look underneath the hood through the art of self-awareness and through some habits and some disciplines, to be able to understand, like, am I actually content with every single thing? Like, do I not want to improve any area of my health, which is me, which is because your health is it's personal to you. That's something that we talk about a lot. It's like you have to have this ability to be self-aware, because if you don't ever take the time to slow down, to disengage from all this information that we're being kind of pushed all the time through culture, we're never going to realize that. So it's almost like that's the same case for brain health and the importance of that pursuit, right?
Yeah, I mean, two things come to mind. One is what gets measured gets managed, kind of a saying that we bounce around a lot. And I think for, up to this point, we don't have a great way of looking at how's my cognitive, capacity, like am I, we can feel things like burnout, or we can feel, mental energy being tired, but like really knowing like, am I at the peak top of my game there? There's really not a great metric for it. So that's something we would love to develop. And then the second thing is that there is like, it's a lifelong journey. Like it's never just like, oh, I'm brain healthy now, like I'm good. Like it's the same thing with all other forms of health. It's just a daily thing. And there's a girl that I follow that she always says, she's like, you have the rest of your life to work out. And so same thing, like you have the rest of your life to like keep your brain healthy. Like it's just truly a daily lifestyle thing. There's no like kind of, I've reached the destination.
Yeah. And there's no quick fix either. You can't read a book, or you can't watch this YouTube video or listen to a podcast or get a degree even. And it's like, cool, I'm good.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, even like the top experts in this, with the exception of a few, like, they don't have it down perfect. They may be the most knowledgeable person in the world on it, but it doesn't necessarily change behavior. We know that. So yeah, I think it's exciting to think about how people can, or like maybe like a sigh of relief for anyone listening that's like, yeah, I want that, or I do want to have a healthier brain, but like that sounds kind of overwhelming or like a big task to take on, or like what would that look like? And I think just to that, I would say like it really is just these small choices that you make throughout the day, like taking brain breaks, like I said, trying to stop multitasking, like a lot of even, we touched on sleep, of just like the importance of not skipping sleep, or just even like the effects of alcohol and like all, these things that are just like so common in culture, that really they're toxic. So I think just like having an understanding of that, and knowing that you don't have to give up like fun or social life, or like that there are different ways to still fill those buckets that don't have to be harmful for your brain.
Julie, I feel like we could talk all night. I mean, I have so many questions and I'm trying to boil them down. The one that I really do want to hear you unpack about as we're kind of round and third in this conversation and kind of heading home is the relationship between your brain health and aging. Because I would say, just personally for me, I'm not going to say any specifics, but I know and personally know person A that as they get elderly, their brain health is at a much lower level. And a lot of the health and freedom that they have is very, very quickly diminishing because it all comes back to their lack of brain health, just decreased levels. Exhibit B, or person B over here, is the exact same age, but their mental health and their brain health is so high because they've done these daily habits and trained their brain, like you said, so well that they act like they're 20, 30 years younger. And I'm talking about people in their 60s and 70s and upwards, on how important that is. Because, I mean, we talk from a physical health standpoint. Yeah, the ability to have strength and stability to pick your grandkids up or have the stamina to go upstairs, that's really important. Or be able to have close friends so that you can share in relationship with as you get older, that's important as well. But just like your brain health and your memory and your habits, all of that stuff is super important as you age as well. I would love to hear you unpack that dynamic a little bit.
Sure. So yes, we know that kind of the quote, I'll say typical journey for brain and aging is we see cognitive decline. However, that is not necessarily normal. I wouldn't say. I think kind of we've accepted that decline as, oh yeah, you just get older and your brain stops working as well. But that is truly not. I mean, the brain is designed to last your whole life, if you take care of it. So I think the reason that, yeah, there may be two different 70-year-olds and one is like publishing their 10th novel and the other is like, maybe in an assisted living facility. There's just, that's massive difference of lifestyle. Like you are building, I mean, from the time you're born, your brain is aging, right? So it's not like all of a sudden you get old when you're 60. It's like you're aging technically starts in your 20s. So just understanding that the best approach is this proactive, preventative, like lifestyle shift that's going to help that. Like when you're in your 20s, like you're building your 80-year-old brain in your 20s. So just knowing like how that affects things. But I think there's a study that looked at kind of what separated these sort of super agers or people like you're talking about that are, really functioning well into later in life. And one big thing was that they engaged in new forms of learning. So, that learning can be physical. It's in like learning a new, type of dance or like a yoga move. It can be social in terms of like learning learning more about new people. It can be actual more like learning in the typical sense that we think of listening to a podcast or reading a book. But just to know that continued learning, continued curiosity, continued kind of this right level of challenge. Now, the level of challenge you need in your 80s is going to be different than the challenge that you can handle in your 30s,
Sure.
right? But find the right level.
Yeah, Julie, that's so interesting. You've mentioned multiple times the learning aspect, and it's really just kind of like challenging the brain. It's almost like if you picture physical exercise, like challenging the muscle with different stimulus over time is going to allow that muscle to develop and grow. It's like the exact same thought process with the brain. For the listeners, I think they're probably curious if you could kind of practically unpack what this looks like for you on like a daily basis, and then maybe on the backside of that, just give your takeaway that you would want to leave the listeners with.
Sure. So I am obsessed with my morning routine / evening routine. Your evening routine really sets you up for the morning routine. So starts with like getting a solid 8 hours of sleep, which like my friends know that I'm a grandma and I'm like, if anything starts like past 8 o'clock, I'm definitely not coming. So yeah, starting with like really prioritizing sleep. I think that's one of like the most essential things you can do. And then for me, like the morning is like truly the best time to really prime and prep your brain for like everything you're about to do that day. So that looks like for me getting in some type of like meditation or breath work, prayer, reading my Bible, and then some form of like morning sun. I walk my dog and then do actual exercise, like whether that's strength training or whatever I'm doing. And then having awesome healthy breakfast, and then I'm ready for the day. So it's a lot. And I would just say like bits and pieces, right? Like it's like you do what you can. Like if you only have 5 minutes, you can do a lot, like 5 minutes of morning sun, 5 minutes of breathing, 5 minutes of just journaling or gratitude or whatever it is that you want to do. But I think knowing that it doesn't have to be this elaborate thing. Like my routine has built like over time, right? I've added in different things. So yeah, and I think I guess what I would leave people with is just this idea that we are living longer. Like our lifespan has doubled in the last century and our brains are not keeping up with our body. And if you don't want to kind of be part of this big statistic of people that are developing, Alzheimer's or dementia, which is hard to think about now when you're younger, but just knowing that you have to start now. So I would just kind of instill a sense of urgency and importance in really prioritizing thinking about your brain and really learning what it is that you can do. And there's so much that you can do that is free and that is, really doesn't have to take a lot of time from your day.
Julie, such a great conversation. Thank you so much for your knowledge. And I know the listeners definitely took something away. If they want to stay in touch with Julie Fratantoni, how can they stay engaged with you?
Yeah, probably the best way is just through my Instagram at Dr. Julie Fratantoni. I have a website as well if you want to, reach out that way. But yeah.
Awesome. Listeners will also put that in the description of the podcast. But thanks as always for tuning in to the Whole of Health podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you want to learn more, check us out on social media or visit us at holohealth.com to learn how you can start living a truly healthy life today.